Did you know Mojang once made a trader villager for Minecraft? Did you know that this was the original design for the Phantom? And this is one change you might have missed for every Minecraft mob. Starting first with this major redesign to the Copper Golem. While the Copper Golem's been a long time coming to Minecraft, before it even had its place in the mob vote, it had even older designs back in the concept art. And we can see here that it used to look a lot more similar to the other golems that we see. Not having its iconic nose, but instead maintaining the lightning rod and even having functionality with the lightning rod on its head, which isn't possible for the current one. Did you know that allays were originally called the Wisp? And not only were they called the Wisp, but they would also carry items inside of their body. And you can see this example with an apple actually rendering inside of the Wisp. And they were originally planned for the Nether update. They ended up just coming to 1.19 when they won in the mob vote. Let's talk about another mob that's had its look changed. The armadillo's eyes originally used to be on the front of its head, but then it moved to the side in snapshot 24W03A when players reminded Mojang that front-facing eyes are usually for predator animals, whereas ones on the side are usually for prey, which armadillos are. Observer, would you give an example of how this is prey? Thank you. All right. So axolotls originally had their texture where the Lucy, the pink one, would have its open mouth at the front of its texture. Given a very peculiar sight, it actually was hidden within the texture sheet for the mob, but it never actually made it into the full game, and it was ultimately removed in 21W18A. Bats don't do a lot in Minecraft, but at some point they actually were intended to. Since when Notch was floating around the idea for the bats originally for a Halloween update, he mentioned that they could be a potential aggressive mob, actually working more like vampire bats that you see in different mods, sucking your blood when they got next to you. And while I can't say that I exactly want hostile bats around in the caves, it would do a lot more than just having bats that do absolutely nothing in caves. When bees were first added in, they didn't have anything in their code. That made them try to avoid water. And it wasn't until snapshot 19W35A that they actually started to, as you can see here. They just splashed along the top, but beforehand they would just get stuck and they would drown themselves. Unable to escape, their little lungs couldn't take very much. So it was only for the initial snapshot these bees were added in where they would actually have the chance to drown. Fighting blazes is annoying, but it used to be a whole lot more annoying because in the past when you would fight blazes, originally in pre-release of beta 1.9, if you were to kill a blaze and it was on fire, which the blaze can occasionally do when it gets angry, it wouldn't actually drop its loot because it would consider that it burned. So you could get blaze rods from the blaze that you actually wouldn't get because those blaze rods couldn't stand up to fire. Before the bogged were fully added during the 1.21 experimental snapshots, the trial chambers would actually just spawn skeletons using tipped arrows as the development placeholder. So you'd see this skeleton just holding tipped arrows and it would still shoot you with poison, ow, like so, but it didn't have any kind of special texture. And technically, if you wanted to make a skeleton that could shoot off different tipped arrows yourself, you could just give it with the item replace command into its weaponed offhand. So now this skeleton will shoot me with healing arrows, which seems a little redundant. Ow. Yeah, it doesn't make me heal anymore, but it makes it hurt a little less. Unlike other hostile mobs, it was changed so that the breezes won't actually aggro against other mobs that happen to hurt it. So if you've ever seen two skeletons shoot at each other because one of them accidentally hits them with an arrow when they're shooting at you, that same behavior isn't mirrored in the breeze. So this was changed during 24W04A so that the breeze becomes particularly more forgiving. Oh, okay. Yep, I guess we'll leave the door open or closed. I'll take your word for it. Oh. So camels have a glitch where if you put them inside of a minecart, they would constantly play their running animation when you would push it. And this existed more in older versions of the game. And you could also previously make it so that you could jump on the camel while it was inside of the cart, letting you consistently play its running animation. But nowadays, it doesn't do the same. So if we had our cats here, they used to actually eat pufferfish. But this was changed because obviously pufferfish are poisonous, and we wouldn't want that happening to our cats. Nowadays, it's not gonna work. Cave spiders used to be so hostile that they would actually go after you in creative mode. Prior to 1.7, cave spiders could aggro onto creative mode players if you provoked them, like so. But now they've been changed to be like most mobs because there's really no point in going after an invincible target. Chicken babies used to not be able to swim, and it was pretty sad that prior to 14W33C, if you got one of these baby chickens inside of the water, it was just doomed to drown. It was due to its hitbox being so small that it actually just couldn't properly swim. swim. When the cod mob was first added into Bedrock, its spawn egg actually used to be fish eggs. Which, I gotta say, actually looking at that old texture, it looks a lot better than what we have now. I think it's a fun idea having it look like actual fish eggs as opposed to whatever this is. It used to be possible to take a cow and take a mushroom and actually breed them together, giving you a baby of either type. Nowadays, it's not possible. You can only breed cows with cows or mushrooms with mushrooms, which is a bit unfortunate considering that if you were to shear it off, they're all cows underneath. Unfortunately, it's just not the case anymore. When you spawn a Creaking, it usually should disappear when it becomes day. If I set it to night, and if I were to get a Creaking heart, you'll see the difference. Set it to day, immediately disappears. If I were to take this Creaking and give it a new name, like NameTad, and then set it over to day, even though it's daylight outside, this Creaking won't disappear. When creepers were first introduced, they weren't actually meant to explode. And in fact, as we'll see through a little bit of a representation here, creepers originally in Classic Edition would deal melee damage, dealing up to 4 HP every time they hit you, which is 2 hearts by today's standards. And the only time that they would explode was after dying, making it even more annoying to go after one of these, considering that even when you killed it, you were still gonna have to deal with the repercussions. Ah, there you go. When dolphins were originally added, their head was separated from their body in the model. But nowadays, if you were to look at it, you'll actually see that it's one solid dolphin model, which I think is nice. The old look just looked really cursed with that separated texture. And if you look at the spawn egg for the dolphin now, cursed is the word that comes to mind. Donkeys haven't always had a spawn egg. And then in 1.10, we got the 16W20A snapshot, which made donkey spawn eggs that were added, but then removed again in pre-release 2 for that same update. And it was only re-added again during 1.11's snapshot 16W32A. And now we can just confidently get a donkey anytime that we want to spawn a donkey. Drowned originally used to drop gold ingots instead of the copper ingots that we're familiar with today. And that got changed in snapshot 21W05A for update 1.17. Oh, and as a bonus change for the drowned, did you know that they used to be able to use the channeling enchantment? Their tridents would actually function and summon lightning when thrown. Elder Guardians used to be immune to any kind of fire or lava damage, which is interesting because if you consider these as boss mobs, that's something that other boss mobs also share in common. You're not going to be using lava or fire to kill off the Ender Dragon or the Wither, but it only lasted for one snapshot, the 1.8 snapshot 14W25A, and was removed immediately after. And now we can cook them alive. In 1.19.3 for snapshot 22W44A, Minecraft finally added in the ability for Ender Dragon spawn eggs, which as Observer's going to show off, let us spam down a whole bunch of these with a macro. Yeah, so if you wanted to know who to thank for that, it's 1.19.3, but they're still only obtainable via commands to help destroying the world accidentally. So when Endermen were first introduced in beta 1.8 pre-release, they were able to pick up any block in sight, including bedrock. So we could create a very weird site where an Enderman could pick up bedrock and then place it down somewhere else in your world, basically soft locking you by placing that down. And thankfully, that's since been removed. However, it was temporarily added back in during the 1 block at a time snapshot for April Fools, where they were able to pick up any block again. And if you were to update your world from that version, you could still technically have an Enderman carrying any item. When Endermites were first added in, but not fully released, there was a chance that an Enderman teleporting could spawn an Endermite. A 15% chance, but every time that they teleported and spawned one, it would decrease each time. However, the result of this is that Endermen essentially turned into walking Endermite spawners. And because they hate Endermites, this created a real problem as they were just dragging around the problem that they wanted to destroy. And it was eventually removed later in 1.8 in snapshot 14W28A. When evokers were first added in, they would only spawn inside of the woodland mansions, which were a rare structure to find, which meant that the Totem of Undying was a rare and valuable reward for going and finding them down and killing them. But with the release of raids in 1.14, this meant that totems became plentiful, as now hardcore players could actually have the ability to raid farm and get a whole bunch of these things. So if you're wondering why hardcore got a lot more viable, but maybe a bit more boring, you have this guy to blame for it. In snapshot 21W05A, as you can see, our foxes have the ability to walk over powdered snow, making them one of the rare mobs that's able to stay safe from such a drop. So much like us with the carpet trick, they're safe. When our frogs were originally added in, now we breed them using slime balls, but in the past we used to breed them by using seagrass. And not just that, but as a placeholder sound for them, anytime that they took damage, they would actually play the player damage sound. While the Chase the Skies drop had us paying a lot of attention to our happy ghasts, our regular ghasts also got got an update, considering that now their texture has been made to be pixel consistent with their model, matching up with the new pixel consistent textures on the Happy Ghast. And that's one of the things that when we made our Happy Ghast before the update and our passive hostile mobs mod, we actually made it with the regular old ghast texture pixel style as opposed to the new one. When giants used to exist, there actually used to be an even older version of the giant that looked exactly like the player. During InfDev, giants were briefly modeled as humans instead of zombies, and so it would look like a giant Steve that was running around. But technically still possible today. If you were to do the attribute command on yourself, this is what it would look like. Imagine this looking down at you. Still possible, but thankfully not a mob that's gonna be running around anytime soon. The glow squid, as much as it's a hated mob that was added from the mob vote, actually has its roots dating back to Minecraft Earth. But since Minecraft Earth was shut down, it would eventually get added in properly through the mob vote in 1.17 snapshot 21W03A. When you think of goats, you think of the goat horn item, as we can hear from Observer. The truth is that the goat horn item wasn't added until 2 updates after the actual goats. Yeah, it's strange to think back on it, but it wasn't until 1.19 snapshot 22W17A that goat horns were actually added in as a feature that would drop when the goats would bash their skull against a wall. Then before that, they were added back in the Caves and Cliffs Part 1 in 1.17. They weren't sharing their horns with us. If we were to take a fire aspect sword and then kill off a guardian, then much like other mobs that we kill off using fire aspect, they actually have a chance of dropping cooked versions of cod as a food item. Though it's gonna be a rare drop. Even with looting 3, I'm still having trouble getting it. There you go. Cooked cod. And funnily enough, the way that fire aspect impacts drops, this actually can still happen underwater, giving you a cooked food source if you're down in the ocean monument. While the Happy Ghast didn't exist necessarily back in Minecraft Legends, in that game, there actually was a rideable ghast mount, which serves as one of the earlier concepts for the Happy Ghast mob that we see today, though it didn't have as nice of goggles, which honestly, that's a missed opportunity. Hoglins are annoying, but they actually got nerfed, which is that in 1.20.2 snapshot 23W33A, the Hoglin's reach was changed to match its hitbox. So this allows players to avoid its attacks with a 1.5 block pillar, as opposed to needing a 3 block pillar that they needed before this, which is just brutal. And especially when you look at how short this mob is, the fact that I would have needed to go up on top of this whole stack, which is taller than the range of an iron golem, is ridiculous. As recently as the 1.21.6 Chase the Skies drop, only now are we actually able to feed our horses carrots. And only now are we able to use carrots for growing, healing, and taming. Which when they add in a change that simple, it really makes you wonder why it wasn't added from the beginning. Before the drown were added, it was actually possible for our husks to drown when they got inside of the water. But this got changed in 1.13 when we had the drown added in 18W19A. Since now, our husks will actually hydrate into a zombie, which then hydrates into a drown, giving us a full conversion of the 3. In 1.18 pre-release 5, the Illusioner had some minor texture tweaks that were fixed on top of it. And why is this significant? The Illusioner is a mob that's never been properly introduced into the survival game. And while it's accessible through summon commands, not something you're going to engage anytime in the base game. But they're still making tweaks to it as if it was. So at least they're still keeping their eyes on it. Who knows why? In the snapshots for 1.9, our iron golems actually got a bit smaller. Originally, they stood at 2.9 blocks tall, but since it's been dropped down to 2.7 blocks that we see today. As of 1.21, it's now possible that if you were to get an enchantment on top of the llama's carpet, usually through the help of creative mode commands, it actually shows the enchantment glint on top of the llama. And now this one has blast protection 4. It's subtle, but it is there. As of 1.20 with snapshot 23W18A, magma cubes are now affected by jump boost potion effect, giving you insanely high jumping magma cubes. And considering that magma cubes jump height also scales with their mob size, that means that if you were to make a supersized magma cube with a supersized potion effect, you could make it jump so high that it would jump completely out of render distance, essentially deleting itself. While we think of getting the weird brown mushroom through the help of lightning with channeling tridents or copper lightning rods, it is actually possible to get a brown mushroom when you breed together 2 red mushrooms, but it stands at only a 1 in 1024 chance. So if you want to have the odds of shiny hunting in Pokemon, grab some hay and have some fun. There you go. In the original design for the mule, they actually used to have hooves and proper tail on their model, but now it's been simplified down to match the other Minecraft models because the original design was a lot more based on Mo Creature's design, which I like the hooves, but I'm not so crazy about its giant mouth that was open. In 1.14 snapshot 18W43A, our ocelots were properly separated from the cat model, making them both into separate mobs. But this also meant something tragic in that we could no longer tame our ocelots. And that made their whole use as a creeper scare tactic kind of obsolete. Now we're just going to be going and getting our cats from the regular village. Prior to Snapshot 19W08A, it actually used to be possible to equip armor onto pandas. Much like villagers, they have a secret inventory allowing us to apply things like Thorn's armor into their armor slot. But unfortunately, this was removed, much like it was for dolphins. Originally, we used to tame our parrots using cookies as a reference to the old saying, Polly wants a cracker. But this was then changed to now kill the parrots because players mentioned in a post that it was harmful because chocolate is actually lethal to parrots, making it the only way to actually die of poison inside the whole game. What we have here might look pretty silly, but it's based on something even sillier, which is that the development name for the Phantom after it won was jokingly called Rainbow, because when they were designing it, they designed each part with different colors of the model, and so it gave us this weird multicolored design for the Phantom, which isn't exactly scary for the monster of the night sky. And what we have now, albeit annoying, definitely looks a lot more fitting. Prior to Beta 1.9 pre-release 3, it actually used to be possible to ride baby pigs, which as you can see now is still possible with commands, but it's been removed in survival, which is probably for the best. The way that I'm sitting on this, it doesn't look like anyone's having a good time. When Mojang's developing new mobs, they typically like to add in placeholders, and usually the placeholder for a lot of that is diamonds. So that meant that back in this tweet from Henrik Nyberg on January 14th of 2020, it used to be that when you would give a piglin gold, it would give you in return diamonds. Though this was ultimately removed because it would have been way too overpowered, and they gave you all of the other loot instead, such as spectral arrows. In Bedrock Edition, it used to be possible for piglin brutes to spawn in peaceful difficulty, seeming very unfitting for one of the most brutal hostile mobs in the game. And luckily, it's since been removed, much like me. During Snapshot 19W39A, if you were to remove a pillager's crossbow from its inventory, it would actually remove its arms. But now it's since been changed that if a pillager were to drop its crossbow, it's effectively pacified and it still has arms, which makes sense. I never really thought of the crossbow as being part of its body. Polar bears didn't always have immunity to freezing damage from powder snow. And actually, it used to be possible if you got a polar bear stuck inside of some powder snow, all of that thick fur wasn't keeping it safe, and it would die like the rest of us. But as of Snapshot 21W13A, it's been changed so now they're safe, and thankfully so. Pufferfish used to look a lot differently, and I'm not talking about the mob, I'm talking about the sprite. Since when you used to fish these up, they actually used to have very different texture, not just in color, but also the face on the pufferfish was completely different. And now it looks a lot more on brand and a lot cuter too. Prior to Snapshot 14W31A, our rabbits actually used to be completely immune to fall damage, but this has since been changed, and now ever since 1.8, rabbits will drop to the ground and a raw rabbit will be there instead of them. When the Ravager mob was first added back in Minecraft, it used to be called the Illager Beast, originally introduced in Snapshot 18W43A, but in Snapshot 19W05A, it was changed back to Ravager. And in that same update cycle, they actually used to interact with rabbits, being afraid of them, but that was changed since it seemed to defeat the purpose of the mob in Mojang's eyes. It would have been a fun way to prepare yourself for raids though, carrying around a rabbit on a leash. When the salmon mob was first introduced, it used to have a pretty big change for it. And I'm just talking about the fact that we could have different sized salmons, which is a more recent change, but actually the salmon used to have 20 HP or 10 hearts, which if that sounds familiar, it's because that's the same amount of hearts that we have in survival. But that was eventually changed down to just 3 HP in Snapshot 18W10A, and nothing's ever strong enough for the observer. In an upcoming change, it's now been made so that sheep will eat grass twice as efficiently. So if you've noticed a problem in your sheep farms where they're running pretty slow, that's actually been because of a bug that's been present since 2021. And that bug is now getting fixed with the new update. Our sheep will eat the grass on the ground twice as much as they have been in this glitched period. So shulkers with the invisibility effect used to still show their heads, just removing their shell with the effect. But now if you were to make a shulker invisible, the whole mob turns invisible. And that's been the change since Snapshot 24W33A, which works out pretty well if you want to make invisible mob-based blocks. And you can even see that in Mysticat's old building a house underneath the void video, where their shulkers were always present. Currently, silverfish can infect blocks if mob griefing is set to false, which makes sense, they'd be griefing the blocks if they're infesting them, but that wasn't always the case. And prior to Snapshot 15W51B, there was 4 years where the mob could still go into blocks even if mob griefing was set to false, making it particularly annoying if you had any of these still spawning at the end portal. Prior to Snapshot 16W32A for the 1.11 update, it used to be that if a skeleton item was on fire, it could actually shoot you with flaming arrows, which was a particularly big problem if you had a fire aspect sword or if you got too close to some lava in the caves. But this was deemed a bug and was since changed. And the way that we have it showing off here is because it has a flame enchanted bow. If you were to go into the skeleton horse's texture file, you'll notice that it used to have a chest embedded within the texture, despite that not actually ever being displayed on the horse. And in fact, even if I have a tamed skeleton horse like this, I can't add a chest on top of it, much the same way that I could if I had a donkey or a mule. So slimes originally used to spawn anywhere below Y level 32. And the reason this happened is because this existed before slime chunks even existed within the game. And when slime chunks were originally introduced, they would only happen 1 out of every 100 chunks. But then that was quickly changed to the 1 out of every 10 chunks that we see today, making it a lot easier to make your slime farm, even if this doesn't exist where they're spawning below Y level 32. Snow golems can't be bred. However, this used to be possible if you actually used wheat. Though, stranger still is that while we could breed them up with wheat, they would also attack you if you were holding that very same wheat. So I guess they want to be dating, but they don't. I don't know. Love's a confusing subject. You probably shouldn't go around killing sniffers. I mean, why would you want to? They're pretty cute. But originally, what would happen is that if you used to kill a sniffer, it would actually drop moss blocks on death. Which, considering that moss blocks help you hatch a sniffer egg faster, I guess it would help you get your next sniffer sooner. But considering how you treated the last one, it's probably for the best if you just skipped out on sniffer pets. In Snapshot 13W24A, for version 1.6.1, spiders were given the ability on harder difficulties to naturally spawn with potion effects. And this can include anything from speed, strength, regeneration, or most peculiarly, invisibility, given just these floating spider eyes going throughout the cave. Much like our Elder Guardians, you probably didn't expect this, but squids used to be completely immune to any damage from magma blocks. But this was then changed to the expected behavior in 1.15 Snapshot 19W34A, and now they'll die just the same. In-game, the Stray's original name during development was entity.skeleton.name, which seems pretty confusing considering that there would have already been an entity with the skeleton name. And this was eventually fixed in 1.11 Snapshot 16W32A. And as an added bonus, the Stray, when it was originally added for Pocket Edition, used to not have any of these cloaks that we're seeing here. It wasn't a separate part of the model, but instead it was just baked into the texture, making it look a lot more like a regular skeleton. As of 1.21.5 Snapshot 25W02A, Striders were made to be faster. And if you didn't notice it, it's because they were only made to be about 2% faster. Which, hey, I'm glad to see it get faster, but it's still wildly impractical. At least we're trending in the right direction. If we get a couple more updates like that, maybe we'll be somewhere. In 1.19.3, the Snapshot 22W42A gave tadpoles a unique subtitle for when they grow up. And the reason for this is that it gives us a special way to track whenever the strider is more closely becoming into a frog. And so unlike other animals, you'll be able to tell when the tadpoles grow up without looking. And there we go. Tadpole grows up. Prior to Snapshot 21W20A, trader llamas would actually spit at you within peaceful mode. But this was then changed so that it would no longer get provoked if you were playing in peaceful mode, which changed it from being one of the only hostile encounters that you would encounter in peaceful mode, keeping you safe even if you want to be a bit mean. Tropical fish used to be able to spawn within inside of our water columns, which meant that we could make highly efficient farms like this, but also had the opportunity to clog up mob caps because it created a lot of unintentional ground items, giving you a fish fountain, but also a lot of fish cleanup. And in Snapshot 22W07A, for update 1.18.2, that bug was eventually fixed. Back in 1.13, only the drowned would attack our baby turtles, but as you can see now, that's been changed to actually include things like foxes and cats as well, which I wouldn't say that adding new ways for baby turtles to die would exactly be on my changelog list, but I guess it's accurate, if not a little horrific. In 1.19.3, our Vexes were changed to more closely model the Allay. However, this actually might have been inspired by an earlier Vex pet that we saw in the DLC for Minecraft Dungeons, the Guardian Vex, giving us a pink Vex which looks very similar to the Vexes that we see today, but it was also carrying some kind of mace. Just not the maces that we're seeing today. In the April Fool's snapshot for 25W14, Craft Mine, there was a secret villager variant added in called Traders. And they weren't meant to be traded with, but instead, they would buy minerals like diamonds from the player, and they would trade those for emeralds and mine ingredients. And they looked like illagers which were disguising themselves in villager cloaks. And speaking of illagers, prior to 1.14 13.3's pre-release 2, Vindicators used to spawn within Pillager patrols. So if you saw one of these spawning out in the open, you would have the chance to go against the way more lethal Vindicator, which is capable of dealing up to 19 points of damage on higher difficulties. But they were deemed too dangerous for players to happen upon randomly, and as such, you're only going to find these inside of woodland mansions or the raids when you get the Bad Omen effect. When Wandering Traders were first added in, they were incapable of giving the player any emeralds. But now, as of 1.21.5, Snapshot 25W07A, the traders now have an option to sell players things for emeralds, in addition to the other experimental changes that we've seen for Wandering Traders, which are getting added in, now giving us the chance to sell these baked potatoes for emeralds and then buy the other stuff that they're selling, because otherwise you wouldn't exactly be getting anything. You had to already have emeralds to be able to interact with these guys. The Warden went through a whole bunch of different concept variations, but one of the strangest ones that I've seen, as opposed to the hollowed or other versions that we've seen in the past, is this one, where we saw these more ethereal versions, looking a lot more like an LA kind of ghost as opposed to anything that we're seeing in the game now, which would have been a lot more fitting for Minecraft than some of the creepy ones that I've seen in the past. You might not have noticed this, but witches have actually had it added where now they will dance and laugh when all of the villagers are killed within a raid. It's not exactly a piglin dance, but it does work, and you can hear it laughing too. Before 1.5, it was possible to actually place our withers inside of minecarts, essentially trapping the boss mob. Well, this could have been a fun way to do wither mining because you could actually just push it down your mine shafts. Though being able to trap such an important mob like this, it really doesn't seem intentional. And that's why it was patched out in Snapshot 13W05A. From our wither onto the wither skeletons, we'll notice that it was changed so that wither skeletons actually have the ability now to sprint, because in 1.4.4 they were changed to run at a different speed when they're aggroed as opposed to when they're patrolling regularly. And so when they get angry at you, they'll be a lot faster to chase you down. As of 1.21.5, the wolves have now received sound variants. And what that means is that while the original wolf sounds are still there, we now have newer wolf sounds which are varied, realistic, and somewhat spooky. But with all the other wolf changes that they made, giving them more realistic breeds and variants, it makes sense that they would also want to change up their sounds to be more realistic too. If you were to take a Zoglin and leash it up, now, because of 1.21.2, Snapshot 24W36A, Zoglins will actually retain the lead after zombifying, giving us the ability to leash and pull around a Zoglin. In Bedrock Edition, there's a whole bunch of other zombie jockeys than just our classic chicken jockeys. But the strangest of this is that it's actually possible for baby zombies to ride the adult zombies. And while here we have it mocked up in Java Edition with it riding on top of its head, it actually, in Bedrock Edition, will ride on its shoulders, giving a bit of collision in the models, which looks a little odd, but I like the idea that it's given a piggyback ride. While the zombie horse was added to Java Edition first, it was later added into Pocket Edition with Bedrock, but it's impossible for people on Bedrock to actually ride it within those versions. And here we have that mocked up by having someone who's wearing Bedrock currently sitting on top of it. I can't ride the zombie horse while it's there. Which, considering the zombie horses don't spawn naturally anyway, I don't know why we'd remove a feature but still add them in. Seems very odd. When you found a zombie spawner down in the dungeons, it actually used to be possible for zombified villagers to summon in here. But this was later changed in 1.11 Snapshot 16W32A, where now our zombie villagers are not going to spawn from the spawner setup, they'll only spawn at night, or if a villager were to get zombified. And it was actually so effective back in the day that Etho was able to make a farm that would supply his village with villagers just from one of these zombie dungeons. Zombie pigmen drop rotten flesh, which isn't a great food source, but it used to be a whole lot better, because before they were zombified piglins and they were just zombie pigmen, back in alpha version 1.2.0, they used to drop between 0 to 2 cooked pork chops. But that was eventually removed in beta 1.9's pre-release, and that's when we got our familiar rotten flesh and gold drops from these guys.
And with that, folks, YouTube thinks that you might like this video, so see if they're right and have a good one, alright?